From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
Welcome to Face the State. I'm Brandon Michaels. Winters in Montana can take us for a wild ride. Sometimes they're mild and dry. Sometimes they're bitterly cold and very snowy. This year, we got a little bit of both. Over the next half hour, myself and members of the Storm Tracker weather team are going to be recapping the ups and downs of the winter of 2018-2019. Let's start things off with just a general overview. I'm sure many of us remember this winter by the way it ended, which included some record-breaking snow and record-breaking cold in the month of February, but that's not how winter started off. We take a look at fall. Things were actually proceeding as normal. The first snowfall of the season in Montana, usually only a few weeks after the first day of fall, and this year, no exception to that. Most of the state saw the first few flakes falling in the first days of, on the last day of September. The exception there being Kalispell. They had to wait a couple of more days, but in general, things were running about average. Now, if we head a little bit farther into fall here, we're looking at the winter outlook for from NOAA for the entire country, and in general, when this was issued in October, we're looking at a pretty easy winter for us in Montana. You can see above average temperatures, and if we flip over to precipitation, pretty dry. Actually, a very good chance that we would be drier than normal. So overall, it was shaping up to be a pretty easy winter for us. Now, why were we thinking that would be the case? Well, we're going to be dealing with an El Nino, and you saw that there. That's a warmer body of water in the Pacific Ocean, and that tends to make some pretty big changes to kind of the global weather patterns. You see, the jet stream kind of gets pushed into Canada, and the farther that is to our north and east, it allows warmer air to move in. It also allows drier air to move in. I'll flip it back to kind of a normal year here. You can see that jet stream is quite a bit closer to us, and that is kind of the separator between the cold air and the warm air. So the farther that is away, generally the warmer we are. And that was a pretty decent prediction, at least for early in the season. December and January, we saw in general a big ridge in the jet stream, and that allows that warm air to lift up into Montana. We did see near average snowfall, but it was very warm. In fact, we regularly saw Chinook winds that warmed parts of the state into the 50s. So a pretty easy start for us into the winter. Of course, the complete opposite true as we head into the month of February. That jet stream dipped way down, and we saw lots and lots of cold spells, and we saw lots of snow as well as Arctic air spilled into the state. In fact, Montana, one of the hardest hit areas from that cold weather this winter. Now, we're just starting off with the general overview, but we're going to be diving a little bit more into detail with these temperature statistics. And for more on that, we'll go to meteorologist Casey Herman.
Thanks, Brandon. As you can see here, our winter in 2018 of December started off very mild. 6 of the 7 cities shown here were above average compared to our normal average for this time of year. And as we move into January 2019 temperatures, many areas saw above average temperatures once again. And with these fluctuations of above average temperatures and going below freezing at night, we did see ice jams occur quicker than we normally do. We saw some ice jams in January here in Great Falls along the Missouri River. We saw the frozen river break into large chunks of ice. Now, Montana does see the most ice jams in the lower 48. Most ice jams occur in March. We normally don't see the ice jams occur in January. Temperatures have been pretty up and down so far this winter, which has caused alternate freezing and melting of the water. Now, once the ice breaks apart and starts moving, these big chunks of ice can accumulate one area, making an ice jam. Then February came and everything changed. The month started off with above average temperatures, but then a cold front moved through and we ended the month with below average temperatures for these areas here compared to the normal average. You can see here, like I said, we started off with above average temperatures for February 1st and 2nd here for Great Falls, but then a cold front moved through the state on February 2nd. Swooping through the state, significantly dropping temperatures. This cold front was the beginning of a very long cold spell across Big Sky country. Cold front actually moved through Great Falls already, quickly dropping those temperatures in the 40s and 50s down to the 20s and teens.
That temperature, enjoy it while it lasts, because that 41 degrees, that's going to be the warmest temp we see for a very long time.
And we are in for a very, very cold stretch of weather. If you take a look at this, that's not ink falling into water. That's cold polar air slipping down from the polar region, not Arctic. We're talking polar cold temperatures.
Now, this was a very powerful cold front, dropping temperatures 20 to 40 degrees now in just 1 hour. This is the 24-hour temperature difference on February 3rd compared to February 2nd, which was substantial, with some areas seeing a 50 to 60 degree temperature difference in just one day. And after that day on February 2nd, temperatures never really rebounded the remainder of the month. Many areas seeing consecutive below zero days with extremely dangerous wind chills impacting us statewide.
That weather impacting schools throughout the area today.
From school closures.
Two Medicine Water Company is currently working on a water main break in Browning.
To water main breaks.
We just rotate through them all day long.
Their dedication can be the difference between life and death for a newborn calf.
To calving troubles.
And for the first time in history.
To even ski areas shutting down.
Anything around -30, -35 wind chill or below.
To one school superintendent in rural northeastern Montana calling off multiple times.
I'd much rather go to school in June than go to a funeral in the winter.
While another superintendent making the decision to keep schools open.
If we close schools and parents still have to go to work, then parents have the added worry, and so do we, that there are unsupervised children in our community, and we know that at schools that they will be inside.
Although actual temperatures were very cold throughout the month of February and early March, wind chill temperatures was what made conditions even more dangerous. It is just double-digit below zero temperatures just about everywhere right now, and with a 5 to 15 mile per hour sustained wind, which is nothing to what we normally see here in Montana, but goes a far way when we're seeing those temperatures and makes our temperatures feel so much colder than it actually is. So here's our feels like temperatures, wide ranges here between 20 below and 40 below, and dangerous wind chill temperatures prompted the National Weather Service to issue many wind chill warnings and advisories due to the fact that hypothermia and frostbite could occur if proper precautions were not made. February and early March of 2019 was one for the record books.
February 2019, one of the worst, if not the worst Februaries we've ever seen, at least recorded here in Great Falls.
High temperatures, well below zero. Some of these numbers will likely be record cold.
Just goes to show how cold the month of February actually was. Great Falls, Havre, and Glasgow both finished second place coldest of all time.
Once again, did not break the freezing mark today, so it is now officially a new record here in Great Falls.
But February's weather rolled right into March.
We were breaking records this weekend. March 3rd record lows set in Great Falls, tying the all-time official record March low of -32 set in March 10th, 1932.
Many records were shattered late in the winter of 2018-2019, but also some areas in Montana in early March were recorded the coldest national low temperatures in the contiguous United States, meaning the state which borders touch. On March 2nd, a temperature of 38 below was recorded 25 miles north of Havre, and on March 3rd, a temperature of 44 below was recorded in Mosby. But we made it through the brutally cold temperature stretch, and now moving on to warmer thoughts as we are now in the spring season. Back to you, Brendan.
Well, thank you, Casey. Of course, all that cold coming in February, that's when most of our snow came as well. That ended up being a historic month as far as snowfall. We saw lots of impacts from that, including roof collapses, avalanches, even a city that was trapped by snow. Meteorologist Elizabeth Copeland is going to be explaining the impacts of winter snow on the Treasure State.
Thanks, Brandon. Like you were saying a little earlier, El Nino pattern was what we were tracking for winter's forecast. So initially, winter's outlook, like you were saying, drier than average conditions for all of Montana. And that's pretty much how it's set up for the first few months, at least, of winter. So going into December, we got some single-digit totals out there. Warming and cooling trends continue to melt that snow, so not a lot of snowpack accumulated, but 8.7 inches total in Billings, 6.9 inches in Glasgow, single digits across western Montana, a little bit lower than average in Helena, only clocking in about 2 inches there for December totals. Now, January came, increased totals across most of central and southwest Montana. The only place that decreased was across the north and east, a lot less of that snow across the north and east, only 3.7 inches in Glasgow. The rest of us in single digits in Bozeman and Helena, and then even the teens for Great Falls, Billings, and Missoula, jumping up quite a few inches there. And then February happened. We saw that cold air mixed with that more Pacific moisture, and as that jet stream weakened, quite a bit of snow fell and stayed on the ground for a lot longer with much colder temperatures. So we did track 28.2 inches of snow falling through February in Glasgow. That's 23.8 inches above average. So quite a bit above average, going from about average to these above average temperatures in just a month. 23.2 inches in Billings, 22.2 inches above average in Bozeman, and then 20 pluses for the rest of the state as well. 24.1 greater in Great Falls and in Missoula. So overall, more than 20 inches above average for all of the state. And with all that snow in such a short amount of time, we definitely saw those impacts lasting across most of the state.
With a warm start to winter, a weak base layer was created as snow accumulated quickly in upper elevations.
With so much new snow, these avalanches could break 5 feet deep just in the new snow,
creating areas of instability in the backcountry.
We have people coming from all over the country, coming to southwest Montana. They're getting out in the backcountry snowmobiling and skiing, and it's really important for them to get good, relevant information about the snow so they can stay safe.
One area that saw its share of avalanches were the tobacco roots. In mid-January, 4 hikers climbed a steep and heavily treed area around Bell Lake when they triggered an avalanche. 35-year-old Benjamin Hirsch McShane from San Francisco died, and another was seriously injured.
In Gallatin County, a backcountry skier is dead after getting caught in an avalanche on the west side of the Bridger Mountain Range.
Another skier from Bozeman died in the Bridger Range near Truman Gulch after triggering an avalanche.
New and developing tonight in Teton County, one person has been recovered from an avalanche just west of Shodo.
Another avalanche was triggered by snowmobiles. Avalanches are not limited to backcountry areas. Separate slides in February closed 2 major highways. An avalanche closed part of Highway 287, 30 miles south of Ennis near Quake Lake.
Traffic continues to be an issue this morning for anyone traveling west of Missoula.
Another closed I-90 just east of Lookout Pass.
From impacts in the backcountry to impacts in town, all that above average snow really impacted places in town, especially on those rooftops. So as we added all that extra weight on those rooftops, we saw quite a few collapses. So just to kind of break down what it means to have that snow on rooftops. So we track snow from fluffy to wet, and that's just based on how much moisture content is per square cube of those snowflakes. So the more moisture content per snowflake, the heavier the snow is going to be. So about a 5-to-1 ratio is about the wet snow forecast, and then fluffy snow, about 15-to-1 ratio of water to that snow. So overall, about a foot of snow in fluffy, the lighter snow, 6,400 pounds, which is about a truck. So usually we could see about 20 pounds per square inch on those rooftops is what the average rooftop can hold. So about 9,360 pounds per foot of snow expected on those rooftops, which is about a truck and a car. And you get that wet heavy snow, that's about 3 trucks or 18,720 pounds. Again, a normal roof can withstand about 20 pounds per square foot. So overall, that's quite a bit, about 12.5 there for that wetter snow, which is 1 foot. Well, with 2 feet of snow, you add even more. So about 2 cars for that fluffy snow, 3 trucks for normal snow, and then even 37,440 pounds or about 6 trucks for the wet snow. And overall, quite a bit of snow fell, even over 2 feet in some areas.
With temperatures remaining mostly below freezing, snow collected on rooftops around the state, even causing some to collapse in Bozeman. MTN's Cody Boyer explains.
February evidently was a record snow month. Really caught us off guard in terms of our buildings.
Bozeman City Manager Andrea Surratt says the city's mindset following a series of collapses across the area is direct, focusing on community safety.
Every facility, every building has been analyzed for its integrity, roofs included. Where we hadn't gotten to the analysis yet was some of our park facilities.
She adds the partial collapse of the Bogart Park shell was an eye-opener.
We've had that one incident and we hope to not have any others. We're taking every precautionary measure, but that one was a learning curve for us.
City officials say roofs like this one here at the Gallatin History Museum on Main Street are more prone to issues than others for obvious reasons. The History Museum did close this week for snow removal since their roof dates back to 1911.
It's not just flat roofs, and we're learning that. So we're taking a holistic approach, looking at every facility. We have a a contract with an engineering firm.
In our older buildings, they're really not designed to withstand those stresses.
Lindsay Shack, architect and co-owner of Love Shack Architecture, says city code requires architects to build with snow as part of the equation, but record-setting conditions could still throw a curveball.
Flat roofs work perfectly fine in snow country, but detailing is really critical. And people need to understand that we call them flat roofs, but none of them are flat. They need to be designed with about 1/4 inch per foot of slope. They need to have proper drainage.
With an engineering firm at work to be ready for the future, the city manager says incidents like Bogart Park can be more easily prevented.
We'd like to apologize for that facility in Bogart being not what it needed to be to withstand that snow, and we know what we need to do now.
Bozeman wasn't the only area to have rooftops buckle under the weight. In Great Falls, 32.3 inches of snow were recorded during February.
I think with all the flat roofs, and if you look around here, you can see several of them on some warehouses and everything, that if people don't start paying attention to their building, and if it doesn't warm up or the wind doesn't blow the snow off, a lot more people are going to be having problems.
And with very little melting, a section of roof at the Salvation Army started sagging under the heavy snow. In Missoula, a downtown building was in the process of being remodeled when its roof collapsed. Keeping rooftops snow-free is almost impossible, but MDT plows worked all winter long to keep Montana roads clear. Statewide, MDT has 591 plow trucks and 22 tow plows on call all winter long. Now that's a lot of trucks, but it's the miles that might surprise you. Scott West from the Montana Department of Transportation would know.
Yes, if it's a major statewide storm with all the plow trucks at MDT, and 24-hour period, yes, they encircle the earth twice for the amount of miles that are plowed.
And that's just for one snowstorm. Each year, they maintain 25,000 miles of lane roads and plow about 4 million miles of highway, which is about 160 times around the world, or 8 trips to the moon.
We're busy, busy, busy.
Montanans are no strangers to harsh winters, so having snow removal equipment is necessary. But sometimes, equipment fails, and that's when neighbors like this Dutton man step in to lend a helping hand. MTN's Elizabeth Transu shares his story.
A broken snowplow is not ideal this time of year.
I mean, we started out not knowing if we were going to have a winter, and then all of a sudden it just dumped on us.
That's exactly what happened to this small town in a time of need.
It's old. It seems to cost an arm and a leg every time you fire it up.
Local businesses, Mountain View Co-op and Campbell Aviation cleared the streets.
It was really appreciated.
But residents like Steve Wall keep the town of Dutton up and running.
We should all volunteer in some way, and I just feel like it's important to help out my neighbors. The community of Dutton is probably one of the most giving and helpful communities I've ever seen, and we all pull together and help each other here when there's a need.
And although many are thinking ahead to spring,
I think it's just a fact of life. We live in the north, and we're going to get snow, and that's just the way it's going to be. So
we'll just have to get through this winter.
We're never prepared for more. I mean, but if it happens, and we'll deal with it. We're pretty resilient. We don't have a lot of, big resources or anything, so we make do with what we got, and we make it work.
As we head into spring, more of that snow melt will continue, leading to more of those clear spaces across the snowpack map here. So we'll see a lot more of that melting, a lot more of that clear ground, as until we do it all over again next winter. Back to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Elizabeth. By now, we've shown you an in-depth look at both the cold and the snow that we dealt with this winter, especially in the month of February. At this point in the show, we're going to give you a look at how those harsh conditions in February impacted Montana's leading industry, that being agriculture.
Whether it was Montana's native people or the homesteaders who willingly took on Mother Nature,
I don't know how they did it. I really don't know how they lived out here.
The need and demand for agriculture built and cultivated a way of life that no matter what the conditions, they had to find a way to survive and thrive in Montana's harsh elements. And this past February wasn't anything to write off as an ordinary winter month. Montana's farmers and ranchers felt the impact on every aspect of their lives.
The cold temperatures and the snow sort of came a little later in the winter, came right in the time period when people were calving, so people have issues with frozen ears, frozen tails, just having to work and deal with cattle in deep snow, having to clear snow to create places to calve and feed. Those have been the primary impacts we've heard about so far.
This is what makes or breaks us, and our calves are the most important thing. We just got to make sure we have healthy calves that are alive and stay healthy.
January in some parts of the state would have been a great month for calving. We didn't have as extreme cold. We didn't have as much snow yet. And here in March, and February and March is when we seem to have been hit the hardest. And so I think that's the challenge, is people have pushed their schedules later, or many people have pushed their schedules later, trying to find better weather, better conditions to do it in. And Mother Nature has sort of worked the opposite way, at least this year.
And it wasn't just ranchers battling the elements this past February. Montana's farmers were also hit hard.
Our soil temperatures over the winter under the snow got down to about 22 degrees in that top 2 to 4 inches, and we froze to 40 inches this year. Well, last winter, even as cold as we had snow cover through quite a bit of that, and so it didn't freeze to 40 inches. This year it did, and we didn't have snow cover near as long. We really never started our snow cover until about the 1st of February. And I think we're pretty lucky just to get it at that point when the temperatures really started to turn cold, so it helped insulate some of these plants. And so we'll just have to see when they break dormancy as to what it's gonna look like.
Despite the record low temperatures and long-lasting snowpack, the month of February wasn't all bad for agriculture. The snow helped to blanket the soil, in turn giving crops like winter wheat a bit of protection from the freezing cold. And according to the USDA, snow protectiveness in February was a bit behind last year, but nonetheless still provided some much-needed protection. 28% was rated at excellent. That's behind last year's 45%. Reports also indicated 69% was good to fair in 2019 compared to last year's 44%. And although it will be hard to tell until the snow is completely melted, the latest USDA crop progress report is indicating that winter wheat is faring slightly better than last year. 14% is currently sitting at excellent compared to last February's 8%. In the good to fair section, 2019 is looking to sit at 84%, whereas last year was at 87%.
That snowpack was actually quite beneficial with respect to temperatures and insulating the ground, insulating our crops.
Another aspect to take a look at when it comes to agricultural impacts from the month of February is how the snow and cold has affected insects. Now you might be thinking, how could anything survive a month of below freezing temperatures, right? Well, a lot of it depends on the insect species.
Any kind of delay in plants to grow, because the plant needs to grow and produce flowers, because the insects need to feed on the flowers for nectar before egg laying.
If the plant does grow a bit slower, it can have an impact on certain insects. However, some of these pests are pretty well adapted to Montana winters, no matter how harsh they are.
Last year we had some strong winters too. So sawflies are very abundant in some places, big sandy, and so instead of, we all expected that it will go less, but we had a high infestation of the sawfly.
Although we're not dealing with quite as impressive of a snowpack as last year, the moisture is going to have its impacts as we look forward into spring, both good and bad for agriculture.
You know, moisture is one of the key important role for not only insects, even for the plants too. They need moisture. The insects, for example, they need a moisture. If it is a dry, probably that will kill the insects. So they need a moisture and for emergence, because they have to break their diapassing and the wall, and they have to come out and they feed on the plants.
The take-home message is yes, the cold in February did have an impact on some insects. However, others will more than likely thrive with the increase in moisture. By now, I hope that you have a pretty solid understanding of the month of February and its impacts on agriculture throughout Montana. But now we must shift our attention slightly and look at the lingering effects of the month of February. Things like frozen soil and long-lasting snowpack.
Looking forward, I mean, obviously we still have a lot of moisture, and it's Montana, so we have cold temperature. We're not really done with snow until May. course, we'll start dealing with higher elevations. I think at this time of year we begin to worry about the melt and how fast that water begins to move off of the elevations and move down. Also ice jams in the rivers and creeks. Flooding, wet, mud, those are the issues I think that we worry about more for the spring.
So keep an eye to the sky this spring and your Storm Tracker weather app handy, because we all know there's no such thing as normal weather here in the Treasure State. I'm Jason Laird with the Montana Ag Network, and there's a look at the month of February and its impact on Montana's leading industry.
Well, thanks, Jason. Winter now officially over. It's definitely at times started to feel like spring, but that doesn't mean we're completely done with winter weather. In fact, we generally see our last snowfall sometime between April and May, so there's still time to see some snowflakes. And there's also another way that we see the lingering effects of winter as we head into spring, and that is flooding. Now, one type of flooding that's driven directly by winter weather is ice jams, and this brutally cold winter allowed many of rivers all across the state to freeze over, and as the ice melts, it breaks apart and dams up, causing water levels to rise. And when those jams break apart, they can send huge rushes of water downstream, and I've actually already seen quite a bit of ice jam flooding even in the winter across the state. Now, ice jams are not the only way winter weather impacts flooding in the spring. Obviously, all the snow that falls will eventually melt and turn into water, and all that water has to flow somewhere, and it ends up in the many rivers and streams across the Treasure State, and that causes those waterways to swell up and at times flood. And after near-record snowfall to close out the winter, flooding definitely on the mind of many in Montana, especially given the widespread flooding we dealt with after the historic winter last year. Now, to get a better idea of what to expect in terms of potential flooding for this year, I spoke with Aaron Peters, a hydrologist at the National Weather Service, to see whether or not he's expecting a repeat of last year. Water is one of Montana's most precious resources, but as we know, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Just look at last year, when we dealt with widespread spring flooding. Fortunately, this year isn't shaping up to be quite as bad.
Compared to last year, we're looking a lot better. Last year at this time, we were 150 to 200% of average for mountain snowpack. And right now, I think our highest basin is like 115, 120%.
Given our record-setting February, it may come as a surprise that this year's mountain snowpack isn't all that high.
Winter didn't really start till the first week of February. And while we did have record precip in February, all it really did was bring us back up to normal.
Melting mountain snow is one of the main drivers of major river flooding in Montana. But there's obviously snow on the plains as well. That too can contribute to river flooding, but also causes ponding, overland flooding, and basement flooding.
Plain snowpack is a little bit above average, or maybe more than above average. We have a lot of water in the snow in much of the plains, Cascade County and eastward, and southwest Montana as well.
Even though the upcoming flood season isn't looking extreme, there are some rivers that are more likely to flood this spring.
Right now it's looking like some of the tributaries to the Milk River, like Clear Creek near Chinook, and then Beaver Creek in Valley County, and then the Little Bighorn River in southwest Montana. The Shields River as well might have some minor flooding.
The weather going forward will also have a huge impact on flood potential. A rapid snowmelt or heavy rain event can drastically and quickly increase the likelihood of flooding. It's best to be prepared for flooding now, especially when it comes to flood insurance.
If you live in an area where you're even remotely close to having some flooding problems, or you've had them in the past and you don't have an active policy, you need to talk to your insurance agent now or talk to somebody at FEMA about getting that policy in place.
So far, our winter has left us in a good spot. Now we look forward to spring to see what Mother Nature brings and how the flooding season unfolds. Of course, now that we've moved into spring, we have seen some flooding, including on some of the rivers that Aaron mentioned in that interview. But for now, that's all the time we have. Thanks for joining us on Face the State.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.
We all